let's talk about the arrow functions. What are the arrow functions and why the arrow function is more popular in the ES6? When the ES6 specifications were released, the arrow function was one of the important feature and it become a lot popular. So what we are doing in the arrow function is, earlier you were writing these kind of functions in the ES5, right? Function name, function keyword, then value, and then it is returning some value. Okay, now the same code can be replaced with this. Okay, what we are doing, we are replacing this particular segment. We are replacing this particular, forget about this function key. Okay, now it is taking one argument. Okay, so forget about this and put an arrow, remove this one. Now it is returning a single line argument, right? It doesn't have much code inside it, so you can directly write it like this. It is taking a single as an argument. If there is a single argument, then no need to put these braces around it. So this is an arrow function which is taking a single argument and returning the same value. Okay, but if you don't have any, consider an example like this. Keyboard is not working properly. Okay, so inside this, if you do not have any argument, then always you must need to define something like this. It denotes that this function is not taking any argument and returning you the single line output. So no need to put a return statement here. If you have more than one statement, then you need to put a boundary here, and then you need to execute the code. Okay, so what all the different things, whatever the argument it is taking, replace that. If you do not have the argument, then replace that with this empty brackets. If it has a one argument, then specify that. If it has a more than zero argument, it means one argument, then you can specify that only. No need to put the boundary. Okay, and if it is returning a single argument, single line output, then no need to write a return. No need to put that inside the boundary. You can just put the value. So what it is doing, it is taking a single argument and printing and returning the single value. Okay, similarly this function is taking two argument. This is the arrow function and it is returning the num1 plus num2. So you can also write it in a simplified way, because it is single line output. This is also, you can write num1 plus num2. Okay, because it is a single line, you don't need to put a parenthesis here, you don't need to use a return statement here. Okay, so this is about the arrow function. So let's talk about what else we have. Spread parameter and rest operator. So let's talk about the features of the arrow functions, then we will come back here. Okay, arrow function syntax. I hope now you are familiar with the arrow function syntax. We are just replacing the function keyword. If it is a single line argument, single line output, then you can just put it directly. If it is not taking any argument, then you need to put a bracket. If it is taking a single argument, you can write it without the brackets and then arrow function. Okay, what are the benefits of using the arrow functions? This is another example. You can replace this with single line. Whatever you are writing in the 4 lines of code, now you can write that in a single line of code. That is the benefit of using the arrow function. This function is taking the 0 argument and returning some string. Okay, so you can write it something like this, single line. So arrow functions are actually an important aspect of writing. Now you will be writing the functions in a single line syntax. Okay, so arrow function syntax, I hope now you are pretty much familiar with this. This particular function, what it is doing, it is taking id as an argument and it is returning this particular JSON object. So this is equivalent to this one. Okay, now the important topic about the arrow functions is lexical scope binding. Okay, arrow function has an implicit this binding, which means that the value of inside the arrow function is always same as the value of the scope outside the function. So there is a one issue when you are writing the ES5 code inside the nested callback, you are not able to access this object. Okay, So let me talk about that example. You'll be able to understand. So we have some issue while writing the ES5 code. What is that? Just take a look at here. This is my function. I have written another function here, then another service here calling something else, and then this is the callback function. So inside this function, I will not have an access of this variable, because this particular the scope of this variable is available to the outer function scope. It is not available inside this function. Okay. So how can I access it? What I will do, I will assign this variable to some XYZ variable, and then from there I will be able to access it here. Okay. This is the alternative, because we do not have an access. Okay. Similarly, what you can do, another way of doing it, the another function, the callback function, do the bind with this object. This is my outer function. Inside this inner function, foo service dot do something. It is returning some response. I will not be able to access this object here unless I need to do the bind with this operation. So in the ES5, there is a bind function which is used to bind the data from one function to another function. So what I'm doing, I'm binding this variable, this object, to this function. I will take a look, I will explain this in a separate session itself. What is this problem? So here you are able to access only after this. So these are the two alternatives to access this variable inside the nested callback function. But now using the callback, using the arrow function, no need to write that. Arrow function is providing the lexical scope binding, and you will be able to access this object inside the arrow function. So whatever you are writing here, you can replace this with the arrow function. Replace this with the arrow function. Replace this with the arrow function. Now you will be able to access this variable here, this object here. Response, because it has a single argument input, you can write it also like this. No need to put a boundary because it is single argument. Then arrow function. Now inside this you will be able to access this object. It's cool. Now it is providing you the lexical scope binding. You are able to access this object inside the nested callback. So you will see this kind of scenario while comparing the ES6 and ES5. Why we need an arrow function? Why we should write an arrow function? Okay. Because in the nested callback we cannot access this object. This has a function level scope. To make that possible, we need to use a lexical scope binding using the arrow function. So thanks everyone.